The mysterious disappearance. It was a quiet evening when this strange event happened. Mark sat on the porch of his small house, gazing at the setting sun. The soft breeze of the evening calmed his thoughts. He had just finished a long day at work and was looking forward to a peaceful night at home. His dog, Max, lay beside him, his loyal companion always by his side. Mark had had Max for years. He was more than just a pet. He was Mark's best friend. Through thick and thin, Max was always there for him. Mark reached down and scratched Max behind the ears. The dog looked up at him with his bright, intelligent eyes. Max wagged his tail, showing how much he loved Mark. Life was good, simple, and calm. Or so Mark thought. It was only when the sun dipped below the horizon that Mark began to feel something unusual in the air. He couldn't explain it, but the quiet seemed too quiet. The evening was peaceful, but something felt off. Mark shrugged off the feeling and stood up to go inside. "Come on, Max," Mark called softly. But Max didn't respond. That was strange. Max always responded to his voice. Mark turned to look down at his loyal dog, but Max was no longer there. "Max," Mark called again, this time louder. The silence around him seemed to grow thicker. No answer. No sound. Mark's heart began to race. He glanced around the yard, but there was no sign of Max. His mind raced with thoughts. Where could Max have gone? The backyard was fenced in, and there was nowhere for Max to escape. The street outside was calm. No cars or people. Max had never wandered off before, not like this. Mark took a few steps around the yard, calling his dog's name again. He felt a wave of worry sweep over him. "Max, where are you?" Mark shouted. He checked the small shed at the back of the yard, the garage, and the side of the house. Nothing. No sign of Max anywhere. Mark's worry began to turn to fear. Max never ran away. Never. Mark quickly ran into the house, hoping maybe Max had gone inside to rest. He called out again, checking the living room, kitchen, and even the bathroom. But there was no sign of Max. His heart pounded in his chest. Panic started to rise. He grabbed his jacket and rushed outside again. Maybe Max had slipped out when Mark wasn't paying attention. He ran down the street, calling Max's name with desperation in his voice. "Max, where are you, buddy?" He checked all of the nearby houses, asking neighbors if they had seen his dog. No one had seen him. By now, the entire neighborhood was quiet. Mark couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. He couldn't understand it. Max wasn't the type to just run off, especially not without a reason. He always stayed close to home, always knew where Mark was. Mark felt a deep growing unease that only grew stronger with each passing minute. Hours passed, and the night grew darker. Mark's search became frantic. He asked everyone he could, called animal shelters, and even posted on social media. "Have you seen Max?" he wrote, posting pictures of his dog, hoping someone had seen him. But no one had. The emptiness in Mark's chest grew with each moment. He couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible had happened. Was Max lost? Had something happened to him? Mark could feel the unease deep in his gut, and his mind raced with horrible thoughts. Max had been a part of his life for so long. The thought of losing him was unbearable. It was then, in the midst of his search, that something truly strange happened. Mark was walking down the quiet street, the weight of his worry pressing down on him, when he heard something faint. It was a sound that made his heart stop for a second. It was a soft, almost unnoticeable sound of scratching. Mark froze in his tracks, his head snapping toward the sound. He walked slowly, cautiously, toward the old tree at the end of the street. The sound grew louder as he got closer. It was coming from behind the tree. His heart raced in his chest. Was it Max? Mark rounded the tree, holding his breath. And there, lying in the grass, was Max. But there was something wrong. Something wasn't right. Max wasn't alone. Beside him, standing tall and graceful, was a girl. She was unlike anyone Mark had ever seen. Her skin shimmered under the moonlight, almost glowing, and her eyes were bright, not like any human's. She was looking directly at Mark, but she didn't speak. Max, however, did, or at least, he acted differently. He didn't jump up to greet Mark like he always did. He stayed still, his eyes locked onto Mark's. Max didn't bark or wag his tail. He just looked strange, as if he wasn't the same dog Mark had known. Mark's heart skipped a beat as he stood there, frozen in shock. What was happening? Who was this girl? Why was Max with her? In that moment, Mark felt something he had never felt before. Fear, a deep, sinking fear. The world around him suddenly felt so much bigger and much more mysterious than he ever could have imagined. Max, Mark whispered, his voice shaking. Max simply stared back at him, silent. And that's when it hit him. Max wasn't just missing. He had been gone for a reason. And now, with the mysterious girl standing beside him, Mark was about to find out just how much his life was about to change. The mystery of Max's disappearance was only the beginning. The alien encounter. The next morning, Mark still couldn't believe what he had witnessed the night before. He had spent the entire night pacing around his house, wondering if the strange girl and the eerie events surrounding Max had all been a dream. But when he looked out his window, there she was again, standing by the old tree with Max at her side. She didn't look like anyone he had ever seen before. Her features were almost otherworldly. Her skin had an unusual faint glow, not like any human's natural tone. Her hair shimmered under the morning light, long and dark, with streaks of silver that Mark couldn't explain. She was dressed in strange, silken clothes that seemed to ripple in the wind, almost like they were made of another material, something beyond earthly fashion. Max, who usually greeted Mark with so much enthusiasm, remained still beside her, watching Mark with a quiet intensity. It was as if he wasn't the dog Mark had raised for so many years, but something different, something distant. Mark stood in his doorway, unsure of what to do. Should he approach her? Should he call the authorities? Was she a threat? His heart raced, and his mind was clouded with questions. He had to know more. Taking a deep breath, he stepped outside and walked cautiously toward the tree. As he got closer, Max's ears perked up, and for the first time since his return, the dog looked directly at him, not with the usual affection, but with something more intense. A knowing gaze, as if he understood something Mark didn't. The girl turned her head as Mark approached, her eyes locking onto his with an unblinking stare. There was no fear in her gaze, just calmness, as if she had been expecting him all along. Who are you?" Mark asked, his voice trembling. His mind was racing, trying to make sense of the situation. The girl smiled softly, though it wasn't a smile of warmth. It was different, like she knew a secret Mark didn't. Her voice, when she spoke, was soft, but carried a weight that felt both ancient and familiar. "I am Kaylin," she said. Her voice was like music, otherworldly, yet oddly comforting. "And this is Max. He's more than just a dog to you. He's your protector, your guide, and your connection to something much greater." Mark blinked, his confusion growing. "Protector? Guide? What are you talking about?" "Max is just a dog. My dog. How do you know my name? How do you know Max?" Kayla's smile faded slightly, replaced by an expression that seemed both sad and understanding. She took a step closer, and Max moved with her, his gaze never leaving Mark. It was as if the dog was leading her, guiding her, though she didn't seem to need any guidance at all. "I know much about you, Mark. About your life, your pain, and your love for Max. And I know that something is coming, something that will change everything. Max has been by your side all this time, but he was never just a dog. He was chosen for a reason. And now you are part of a story that stretches beyond the stars." Mark shook his head, his mind struggling to catch up with her words. "Chosen? Beyond the stars? You're talking in riddles. What's going on? Where have you been, And why is Max acting so different? Kayla looked at him with deep sympathy. Max has been on a mission you couldn't understand until now. He's not like other dogs. He's part of a larger plan, one that involves you, Mark. The world you know is only a small part of the reality you're about to uncover. Mark took a step back, trying to process what she was saying. The woman, Kayla, seemed so calm, so certain, while he was overwhelmed with a million questions. How could this be possible? How could Max, his dog, be part of something bigger? Was this some sort of joke, or had Mark lost his mind? Are you telling me that Max is from another world? That he's not just a regular dog? Mark asked, his voice shaky. Kayla nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving him. Yes, Max is more than just a pet. He is part of an ancient bond between humans and beings from beyond your world. He has protected you, even when you didn't know it. And now, that protection is needed more than ever. Mark felt a wave of disbelief wash over him. He wanted to laugh, to dismiss her words as nonsense. But deep down, something inside him told him that this wasn't a joke. Something in the way Max looked at him, something in the way Kayla spoke, made him feel as though she was telling the truth. But if it was true, what did it all mean? Why had Max been chosen? And what did Kayla mean by the protection is needed more than ever? Before Mark could ask more questions, Kayla held up her hand, signaling him to stay quiet. There's no time to explain everything now, she said, her voice serious. You must trust me, Mark. There are dangers coming, and Max has brought you here for a reason. You are about to be swept into something much bigger than yourself, and it's up to you to decide whether you will accept it. Mark's mind was racing. The fear and confusion from the night before had only intensified, and now, Kayla's words were stirring up something deep within him. What was happening? And how had Max, his loyal dog, become part of this? Trust you, Mark whispered, his voice barely audible. Kayla nodded. Trust Max. He will show you the way. Max, who had been silent the entire time, suddenly stood up, his gaze locking with Mark's. The dog's eyes held a new intensity, a focus that Mark had never seen before. It was as though Max was waiting for him to make a decision, waiting for him to step into the unknown. Mark didn't know what to think, but one thing was clear. His life was no longer simple. Max, his dog, was part of something much bigger. And now Mark was part of it too. The question was, what would happen next? As the wind began to pick up, Mark felt a strange sense of urgency. Kayla's warning echoed in his mind. You are about to be swept into something much bigger than yourself. The mystery of Max's disappearance, and the girl standing before him, was only the beginning of a journey that would change everything. Max's return with the alien girl. Mark sat in the quiet of his home, unable to shake the strange events that had unfolded the previous day. His mind swirled with confusion and disbelief. He had always known Max to be a loyal, loving dog, but the idea that his companion was more than that, something beyond his understanding, was a lot to process. The girl, Kayla, had made it clear that something big was coming, but what? And how did Max fit into all of this? It was early the next morning when Mark received the most unbelievable sight of his life. He was sitting at the kitchen table, staring out the window, lost in thought, when he heard a noise from the backyard. A soft scratching sound. His heart leaped in his chest, and his breath caught in his throat. Could it be? Was it possible? He rushed outside, not knowing what to expect. But when he reached the back door and opened it, he froze in place. There, standing on the edge of the yard, were Max and Kayla, exactly where Mark had left them the night before. But something had changed. Max wasn't the same dog Mark had known for years. He stood tall, proud, and almost different. His eyes, once filled with simple affection, now seemed to hold a deep wisdom, like they had seen things far beyond anything Mark could comprehend. Max's fur, once soft and ordinary, had a strange sheen to it now, almost like it was alive with energy. Kayla, too, was changed in some way. Her aura seemed to radiate with power, and her presence was more commanding. She no longer looked like a stranger in Mark's world. She looked like someone who belonged here, as if she had always been a part of it. Mark stepped forward slowly, unsure of how to approach the situation. He called out softly, "Max, is that really you?" Max didn't respond in the usual way. He didn't wag his tail or run over to greet Mark like he always did. Instead, the dog stood still, staring at Mark with an intensity that made Mark's skin tingle. For a moment, it felt like Max was studying him, measuring him, almost as if he were making a decision. Kayla's voice broke the silence. "He's not the same anymore, Mark. Max has undergone a transformation, one that was necessary for what's to come." Mark looked from Kayla to Max, his mind racing. "What do you mean, a transformation? He's my dog, but he's not the same. What's happening?" Kayla's eyes softened, but her expression remained serious. "Max has been part of something much larger than you can imagine. He's been chosen as a protector. His bond with you is more than just the love of a pet for its owner. Max has powers that are part of an ancient connection between humans and beings from other worlds." Mark's confusion deepened. "Powers? What kind of powers? How can he have powers? He's just a dog." Kayla stepped closer to Mark, her eyes searching his face. "You don't understand yet, but you will. Max's true nature has always been hidden, even from him. He has the ability to connect with forces beyond this world, to sense danger, to protect. And now, with the threat that is coming, he is ready to help you." Max, who had been standing silently beside Kayla, suddenly moved closer to Mark. He stopped just in front of him, his large eyes locked onto Mark's. It was as though Max was trying to communicate, trying to tell him something with his gaze. Mark could feel a strange energy in the air as the dog stood there, unblinking, waiting for something. "Max, I don't know what to believe," Mark whispered, his voice cracking. "But you're still my dog, right? You're still the Max I know." For a brief moment, it felt like Max was considering his response. Then, in the most unexpected way, Max did something that took Mark's breath away. The dog stepped forward and gently nudged Mark's hand with his nose, as if to reassure him. Mark's heart swelled with emotion. This was his dog, the one who had always been by his side, through every high and low. But there was more to Max than Mark could possibly comprehend. Kayla watched the exchange quietly before speaking again. "Max's connection to you has always been deep, Mark. But now, it is part of something far greater. He's not just a protector. He is a key. And you are the one who will unlock the power." Mark looked up at Kayla, her words slowly starting to make more sense, though they still left him with more questions than answers. "Unlock the power? What do you mean? What's coming? What does this all have to do with me?" Kayla's expression darkened, and she glanced around them, as though checking for unseen eyes. "The threat is already here. They are watching, waiting. And when the time comes, it will be up to you and Max to stop it. Your lives are more connected than you know." Mark felt a chill run down his spine. The air around him seemed to shift, the quiet morning suddenly feeling tense and heavy. What could Kayla be talking about? Who were these enemies she spoke of? And how was Max supposed to stop them? But before Mark could ask more questions, Max's body shifted slightly, his posture tense, as if he had sensed something Mark couldn't. The dog's ears pricked up, and his eyes darted toward the woods at the edge of the property. He gave a low, almost inaudible growl. Kayla looked at Max, her face serious. "They're close," she murmured. Mark followed Max's gaze, his heart racing. He didn't see anything, but something in the air felt different. The quiet wasn't just peaceful anymore. It felt dangerous. Kayla stepped forward, her voice calm but filled with urgency. "We need to move. They're coming. And when they do, you'll have to be ready. Max will help you, but only if you trust him." Mark's mind was spinning, but he knew one thing for certain. His life was about to change in ways he could never have imagined. He looked at Max, then back at Kayla, and with a deep breath, he nodded. "I don't understand it all, but I'm ready. Just show me what to do." Kayla gave him a small, knowing smile. "It's time to begin." And with that, the world Mark had known, the one where his only worry had been losing his dog, was gone. A new chapter was beginning, one filled with mysteries, dangers, and a bond with Max that he was only beginning to understand. The hidden truth. The day passed in a blur of confusion and urgency. Mark couldn't shake the feeling that the world had shifted beneath his feet. His entire life had revolved around simple routines, yet now everything had changed. Max, his beloved dog, was no longer just a pet. He was something much greater. And Kayla, the mysterious girl who had appeared in his life, was claiming that Max was part of a larger intergalactic mission. Mark could hardly wrap his mind around it. But the unease in his gut told him one thing. Kayla's warnings weren't to be ignored. Something was coming, something dangerous, and Max was central to it all. As the sun began to set, Mark found himself standing at the kitchen table, staring at a map Kayla had drawn earlier that day. She had spoken about a hidden location, a place where the truth would finally be revealed. Mark didn't know what he was expecting, but deep down, he knew it was time to learn more. "Max," he called, his voice barely above a whisper. Max was by his side in an instant. The dog no longer looked just like a pet. There was something in his eyes that spoke of knowledge far beyond what Mark had ever imagined. Max sat patiently, waiting for Mark's next move, his gaze steady and unblinking. It was as if Max was silently urging him to trust, to take the first step into a reality that was beyond comprehension. Kayla entered the room, her presence filling the space with an air of mystery. Her eyes were calm, but there was an undeniable tension in the way she held herself. It was clear that whatever they were about to uncover, it was something serious. Mark glanced at her, his voice filled with a mixture of disbelief and curiosity. "Okay, I'm ready. I need to understand. What's really going on? What is Max's role in all of this? Why is he different?" Kayla looked at him with a mix of sympathy and determination. She walked over to the table, where the map lay, and pointed to a small symbol at the center of the map. "This," she said softly, "is the location of an ancient site, hidden from human knowledge for centuries. It's a place where Max's true purpose began, and it's where you'll find the answers to your questions." Mark leaned forward, his eyes scanning the map. The symbol Kayla had pointed to was marked by strange lines and shapes, unlike anything he'd seen before. It looked almost like a combination of ancient runes and something alien. Kayla continued, her voice steady but with an edge of urgency. "Max has always known this place. He's been to it before, though you may not remember. This site is where the connection between humans and otherworldly beings began, where your fate, Mark, became intertwined with Max's. His transformation wasn't just physical, it was spiritual, a binding of two worlds." Mark's heart pounded as he tried to digest her words. "What do you mean, binding of two worlds? What does that have to do with me?" Kayla's eyes softened, her tone becoming more gentle. "Long before you were born, there was an ancient agreement between humans and a race of beings who lived among the stars. They entrusted their most loyal creatures, animals like Max, with the power to protect the Earth. These creatures were part of a larger network, one that connected various species across the universe. Max was chosen to be part of this network. He's not just a dog. He's a protector, a guardian, with abilities beyond your understanding." Mark's head spun. "But why me? Why was I chosen? I'm just a regular guy. I've never done anything special." Kayla's gaze was intense, filled with both sadness and understanding. "That's where the truth lies. You, Mark, are not ordinary. You were born for a reason. Your connection to Max wasn't by chance. You are his partner, his counterpart in this mission. The bond you share is the key to unlocking the power that has been dormant for so long." Mark looked at Max, whose steady gaze never wavered. The dog seemed so calm, so serene, but there was a power in his eyes that Mark had never noticed before. It was as if Max understood everything, as if he had known the truth all along. "Max chose you," Kayla continued, her voice quiet but filled with a deep truth. "When you took him in, when you gave him your trust and love, you unknowingly accepted your role in something much larger. The moment you found each other, the path was set. You became part of the ancient alliance." Mark's chest tightened. "So all this time, I've been part of something I didn't know about. And Max has been protecting me." Kayla nodded. "Yes, Max's loyalty to you goes beyond what you can imagine. He has always been your protector, your guide, even when you didn't realize it. He saved you from danger countless times, but you were never meant to know until now. The time has come for you to understand the truth. And soon, you'll need that knowledge to survive." Mark stood there, his mind racing. He couldn't understand how it was all possible. How could a simple dog, his dog, be part of something so extraordinary? And how was he, Mark, connected to it? There had to be more. "What's coming, Kayla? What are we supposed to do? What's at stake?" Mark's voice trembled with the weight of the questions he had been holding back. Kayla's expression darkened and her eyes flickered to Max. The dog stood tall beside her, his body tense, as if sensing the shift in the atmosphere. "There are enemies, Mark," Kayla said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Enemies who seek to destroy the bond between humans and the protectors. They want to break the connection, to sever the alliance, and weaken Earth's defenses. And when that happens, the balance will tip. The world you know will cease to exist as you understand it. It will be up to you and Max to stop them." Mark felt a chill run through his body. He had no idea how to fight something he couldn't even comprehend. But Kayla's words were clear. He had a role to play in all of this. He had to trust Max, trust the bond they shared, and do whatever it took to protect the Earth. For the first time, Mark understood. This wasn't just about Max being a dog. This was about survival, about protecting everything they held dear. And it was up to him to uncover the strength within him, and Max to face what was coming. "The hidden truth," Kayla whispered, "is that your journey has only just begun. The real test is ahead, and you must be ready." Mark nodded slowly, feeling the weight of the responsibility settling on his shoulders. The truth was out. The mission had begun. And nothing would ever be the same again. The danger they face, the weight of the truth sat heavily on Mark's shoulders. He had never imagined that his simple life with Max, his loyal dog, would suddenly be part of an ancient and cosmic struggle. He thought he was just a regular guy, living a quiet life in a small town. But now, everything was different. Max wasn't just a dog. He was a protector, a key to saving the world. And Mark, well, Mark was the one chosen to stand alongside him. As the sun dipped below the horizon that evening, the air seemed to shift. The tension was palpable. Mark couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. Something dangerous. The peace he had once taken for granted was slipping away. There was no turning back now. Kayla had been quiet for most of the day, but as nightfall approached, she turned to Mark, her expression grave. "They're here." Mark's heart skipped a beat. "Who? What do you mean?" Kayla's eyes scanned the horizon, her gaze sharp and focused. "The enemies I told you about. They've been tracking us, waiting for the right moment to strike. They want to tear apart the bond between you and Max, and they won't stop until they've succeeded." Max growled low, a deep rumble that sent a chill down Mark's spine. The dog's fur bristled, and his stance became alert, as if he, too, could sense the danger drawing closer. Mark had never seen Max act like this before. There was something primal about the way the dog carried himself now. It was clear that Max wasn't just a companion anymore. He was a force to be reckoned with. "Who are they?" Mark asked, trying to steady his breathing. "They are the shadowed ones," Kayla said, her voice steady but tinged with urgency. a group of intergalactic beings who seek to destroy the connection between Earth and the Protectors. They've been searching for a way to weaken Max's powers and break the alliance. They'll stop at nothing to accomplish their goal. Mark felt his stomach churn. He had never heard of anything like this before. A group of alien beings hunting Max and those like him. It sounded like something out of a science fiction movie. But the fear in Kayla's eyes told him that this was all too real. "What can we do?" Mark asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Kayla turned to face him, her expression hardening. "We fight. We can't let them destroy what we've built. Max will help us, but we need to be prepared. The Shadowed Ones are powerful, but they are not invincible. If we stand together, we have a chance." Mark felt a strange sense of resolve settle over him. He wasn't sure how he was supposed to help, but he knew one thing. He wasn't going to let Max face this alone. He had already seen the bond they shared, the connection that went beyond anything he could have imagined. If Max was ready to fight, then so was he. As if on cue, Max's ears perked up, and his body tensed. Mark followed the dog's gaze, his heart pounding in his chest. From the shadows of the forest on the outskirts of his property, a group of figures emerged, tall, dark silhouettes that moved with unnatural speed and grace. Their eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, and their presence seemed to distort the air around them. "They're here," Kayla murmured, her voice low. "Get ready." Mark felt a wave of fear wash over him. He wasn't a fighter. He wasn't a hero. But as he looked at Max, standing firm beside him, something inside him shifted. He wasn't alone in this. Max was with him. And Kayla, despite her mysterious ways, was on their side too. With a deep breath, Mark steeled himself. He didn't know what to expect, but he was ready. Whatever these Shadowed Ones were, he wasn't going to let them tear apart everything he held dear. The first of the Shadowed Ones stepped forward, its movements slow but deliberate. Its features were indistinct, as though it was a shifting mass of darkness, only its glowing eyes visible. The figure raised a hand, and Mark felt a sudden, oppressive force press against him. It was like the air itself had thickened, and his chest tightened as if something was trying to squeeze the life out of him. Max let out a sharp bark, and in an instant he lunged forward, his body a blur of motion. The Shadowed One staggered back, clearly surprised by the dog's speed and strength. But it quickly regained its composure, raising its arm again to strike. Kayla was already moving, her body agile and swift. She stepped forward, her hands glowing with a strange energy. "We can't let them get too close," she said urgently. "Stay behind Max, Mark. He's the key to your survival." Mark barely had time to react before the other Shadowed Ones began to advance. There were more of them now, encircling them from all sides. But Max was at the center, his eyes blazing with a strange energy. The dog was no longer just fighting for survival. He was fighting for something bigger, for something that Mark couldn't fully understand yet. But he knew that Max would do whatever it took to protect him. A sudden explosion of energy erupted from Max's body, a burst of light that pushed the nearest Shadowed One back, sending it crashing into a nearby tree. Mark stared in awe as Max's form shimmered, his body radiating a golden glow that seemed to repel the darkness around them. The Shadowed Ones recoiled, momentarily stunned by the force of Max's power. But they weren't done. They regrouped, their glowing eyes narrowing as they prepared to strike again. "This isn't over," Kayla said, her voice tight with urgency. "They will keep coming. We need to stay ahead of them, and we need to protect Max." Mark's heart raced as he watched Max take position once again, ready to fight. He had no idea what was coming next, but one thing was clear: this was just the beginning. The danger they faced was only growing stronger, and the fate of the world rested on Max's shoulders, and his own. The fight for survival had begun, and Mark, though terrified, was ready to face whatever came next. Max's true power. The battle was far from over. Mark stood frozen in place, his eyes locked onto Max, who was facing off against the Shadowed Ones with an intensity Mark had never seen before. The air was thick with energy, crackling with a force that seemed to bend reality itself. Max was no longer the dog Mark had known, the one who would happily chase a ball or curl up on the couch. No, Max was something more, something powerful, something ancient. The Shadowed Ones circled around them, their dark forms blending with the shadows of the forest. They were patient, calculating, waiting for the right moment to strike. But Max wasn't backing down. His stance was firm, his body glowing with a soft golden light that seemed to pulse with each breath he took. It was as if he was drawing power from some unseen source, tapping into something vast, something beyond this world. Mark couldn't help but feel a surge of awe and wonder. This wasn't just a dog. This was the protector, the guardian that Kayla had spoken of. Max had powers that Mark could never have imagined in his wildest dreams. Max's eyes met Mark's, and in that moment, Mark felt a deep connection with the dog. It wasn't just a bond of friendship or loyalty. It was something deeper, something primal. Max wasn't just protecting him. He was trusting him, and Mark knew, without a doubt, that Max would do anything to keep him safe. A low growl rumbled from Max's throat as one of the Shadowed Ones lunged toward them. But before the creature could get too close, Max's body shimmered with a sudden burst of light, and a shockwave of energy radiated from him. The Shadowed One was sent flying backward, crashing into the trees with a deafening crash. Mark's heart pounded in his chest as he watched in awe. Max had just unleashed an incredible force, one that Mark could barely comprehend. The power was beyond anything Mark had ever seen. This wasn't just a dog. It was a weapon, a living force that could rival the might of the Shadowed Ones themselves. But even with all this power, the Shadowed Ones were relentless. They regrouped quickly, their glowing eyes narrowing in on Max. They weren't afraid. They had been trained for battles like this, and they knew that their only chance was to overpower Max before his power grew any stronger. Kayla stepped forward, her hands glowing with the same energy that Max was now radiating. "Stay close to Max," she commanded. "The more you're with him, the stronger he becomes. Your bond is his power." Mark's head spun. "My bond? What do you mean?" Kayla didn't answer right away. Instead, she focused on the Shadowed Ones, her eyes scanning their movements. "Max draws strength from the one he protects. You are his counterpart. Together, you can unlock his true potential. He's not just a dog, Mark. He's the key to everything." Mark's eyes widened as he understood what Kayla was saying. The bond between him and Max wasn't just emotional. It was the source of Max's power. Max had been chosen for this moment, for this fight. And Mark, by being his companion, had unwittingly become a part of the equation. Max turned his head toward Mark, and for a brief second, Mark saw something in the dog's eyes. A calmness, an understanding. It was as if Max was telling him to trust in their connection, to believe in the power that was already inside him. Without thinking, Mark stepped forward, standing beside Max. He could feel the energy between them shift, a warmth spreading from his chest to his fingertips. It was as if the power Max had been harnessing was now flowing through him, connecting them in a way that transcended understanding. Mark didn't know how it worked, but he felt the truth in his bones. This was real. This was happening. Max's body began to glow brighter, his fur shimmering with golden light. The Shadowed Ones hesitated, clearly taken aback by the sudden surge of energy. They had expected a fight, but they hadn't expected this. Max was no longer just a protector. He was a force to be reckoned with. The first Shadowed One lunged forward, but Max moved faster than Mark could track. With a powerful swipe of his paw, Max sent the creature crashing to the ground, its body disintegrating into a cloud of dark smoke. Another one charged, but Max was already there, his glowing form a blur of motion. Each strike, each movement, was fluid and filled with purpose. The remaining Shadowed Ones seemed to realize they were no match for Max's power. They began to retreat, their forms dissolving into the shadows from which they had come. But Max wasn't done yet. With a mighty growl, he charged after them, his glowing body a beacon in the dark. Kayla watched in awe as Max pursued the enemies. "He's finally unlocking his true potential," she whispered. "The bond between you two is stronger than I could have hoped for. Together, you're unstoppable." Mark stood there, his heart racing, as Max tore through the remaining shadowed ones with ease. It was hard to believe what was happening. Max, his dog, his loyal companion, was fighting like a warrior, like a force of nature. Mark had always known Max was special, but this was something beyond comprehension. The battle seemed to go on for hours, but eventually, the last of the shadowed ones were defeated. Max stood tall in the center of the clearing, his glowing form still pulsing with energy. He was panting, but there was no sign of weakness in his eyes. He had done it. They had done it. Mark walked over to Max, his heart still racing. The dog's fur glowed faintly, and Max looked at him, his eyes softening. It was as if Max was telling him that the battle was over, that they had won, for now. Mark knelt beside him, his voice filled with awe. "We did it, buddy. We really did it." Max nuzzled his hand, and for a moment, everything felt calm. The world around them had changed forever. But in that instant, Mark realized that with Max by his side, he could face anything. Together, they were a force that nothing could defeat. But deep down, Mark knew that this was just the beginning. Max's true power had been unlocked, but there were more challenges ahead, more battles to fight. And no matter what came next, he and Max would face it together. The journey had only just begun. A new beginning. The night was quiet once more, but it wasn't the same kind of quiet as before. The world around Mark had shifted. The calmness he had once known was now tinged with the weight of what they had just faced. Max stood beside him, his glowing fur dimming as the last remnants of battle faded. The danger had passed for now, but the journey was far from over. Mark sat on a fallen log, his head spinning. The events of the past few days had unfolded like a whirlwind, a storm that had swept him up and changed his entire life. He had learned more about Max, his dog, than he had ever imagined. Max wasn't just a dog. He was a protector, a guardian, an ancient force tied to a cosmic mission that stretched far beyond the boundaries of their small town. And Mark, the ordinary man, was now bound to this extraordinary fate. The sun was beginning to rise, casting long shadows over the clearing where the battle had taken place. It was as if the world was waking up alongside them, as if it too was ready for what lay ahead. Mark stood slowly, his legs stiff from the strain of the fight. Max looked up at him, eyes glowing faintly as if urging him to move forward. "We did it, Max," Mark murmured, his voice quiet, almost in disbelief. He reached out and scratched Max behind the ears, a familiar gesture that, in this moment, felt more significant than ever before. Max had saved them. He had saved Mark. And together, they had defeated the shadowed ones. But Mark knew that victory had come at a cost. There was always a cost. Kayla appeared from the shadows, her presence calming yet filled with purpose. She didn't look tired, not in the way Mark felt. She was, after all, more than human. She had always known what Mark was just beginning to understand, that their battle was only one chapter in a much larger story. And the story was far from over. "You've done well, Mark," Kayla said, her voice warm but firm. "Max's power has been fully awakened, and you've proven that the bond between you two is stronger than anything they can throw at you. But this isn't the end. It's just the beginning." Mark looked at her, a deep sense of foreboding filling him. "What do you mean? We won, right? Isn't that it?" Kayla's gaze softened, but there was a shadow in her eyes. "The shadowed ones are not the only force you'll face. There are others, beings from beyond, ancient powers that want to control the protectors and the earth itself. They'll stop at nothing to break the alliance, to take control of the protectors, and to reshape the world in their image. Your victory here is a small but important step, but the true war is still ahead. Mark's chest tightened as her words sank in. The real war hadn't even begun yet. It felt impossible. They had just fought for their lives, and now Kayla was telling him it was only the beginning. He glanced at Max, the dog who had already given so much, who had fought with a power Mark had never known existed. What more could he and Max do? Kayla seemed to read his mind. You and Max are a team now, Mark. The bond you share will only grow stronger as you face what comes next. You are more than just partners. You are part of a greater plan, one that has been set in motion long before either of you knew it. And you are not alone in this. There are others out there who will help guide you. Others who have fought this fight for centuries. Mark felt a flicker of hope, but it was quickly overshadowed by the weight of her words. There was still so much to learn, so much to prepare for. The world he had known had shifted, and now there was no going back. But as he looked down at Max, standing resolutely by his side, Mark felt something change within him. The uncertainty, the fear, it was still there, lurking in the back of his mind. But there was also something new, determination. He had seen Max's power. He had felt their bond grow stronger in the heat of battle. And he knew, deep down, that they were capable of more than they understood. Mark turned to Kayla, his voice steady. What do we do now? Kayla smiled, though there was no joy in her expression. Now, you prepare. You train. You learn. Max will guide you, and together, you'll uncover the truths you've been kept from. The fight is far from over, but you are ready. You're no longer just a man with a dog. You're part of something far greater, a protector in your own right. And soon, you'll understand what that truly means. Mark nodded, a sense of resolve building inside him. There was no going back. His life had changed, and now it was up to him to rise to the challenge. He wasn't just a spectator in this world anymore. He had a role to play. And so did Max. Kayla placed a hand on Mark's shoulder, her grip firm. There's much to be done, and time is not on your side. But remember this. You are not alone. Max is with you, and together, you will face whatever comes next. Mark looked at Max, his loyal companion, and for the first time, he understood. Max had been chosen. And Mark, too, had a role to play in this grand cosmic mission. Together, they were unstoppable. They were not just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting to protect everything they held dear. And so, as the first light of dawn broke across the sky, Mark and Max stood side by side, ready for whatever came next. The journey was just beginning. And with Max by his side, Mark knew one thing. They were ready. Together, they would face the darkness that lay ahead and fight for the future of Earth, and the future of everything they loved.